Everybody, how are we doing today? We are back at it again, and for once again another Sunday stream. Yes, I'm like a minute late, Robert, I know. But it was 2 o'clock and I had to down some medication. I didn't think about that today when I was scheduling everything. I was like, oh wait, I should be good to go. And then I reminded myself I had some anti-rejection meds to take. So yes, I'm a bit late. But regardless of which, I'm not late and gay, which is the more important part. So good afternoon, everybody, and as everyone pours in, I hope everyone's been having a fantastic Sunday so far. Whether it's the evening, the afternoon, or the morning, wherever you're at, I hope it's a good one. I hope that you've been to church, or at least watched some sort of service, liturgy, or homily today. I hope that everyone's had a good time so far. A minute late and $1 short, I'll keep that in mind. But everything's going well so far, I think. I've got a pretty decent presentation for all of you today. I thought that we would continue on from our conversation last week in regards to Afghanistan because there's just a million different moving parts. And my conversations both on Telegram and on Twitter have been very interesting. So I thought I would continue. Good afternoon, Chris. It's good to see you. Hello, Bolero. Sola scriptum, baby, no church for me. Well, to each their own, as long as that we are all enjoying our faith and embracing it. I think that's all that matters, regardless of denomination or which church you abide by. So, Tron home, no worries. And so Northern Europe over there, so it's probably late afternoon. Alrighty, guys. Well, with that being said, I thought that I would start with just some channel updates and announcements like I usually do. Next week, I'm going to have 2 live streams coming up, one on Wednesday and then one on, I believe, Friday, based on our conversation. Wednesday's an exciting one because I'm working from home next week. I get to have all these extra streams. Wednesday, we will be covering what's going on in South Africa, and I'm going to have 3 very special guests, one of them including Mr. Patriarch. The other 2 I will leave unannounced until I get things all scheduled for a stream. But next Wednesday in the afternoon, tune in because we will be going well in depth about what's going on in South Africa with actual people on the ground, actual activists. It'll be a good time. And then on Friday, I will be having a wonderful backer and someone from my Subscribe Star coming on who's actually well-versed in this area of expertise based on his reading and education. Robert Fried and I will be talking about what's going on in Cuba. So it's going to be a very international affairs, other countries' businesses, affairs of streams this next coming week. So that's what's been going on stream-wise. As I've announced earlier, though, I've been dealing with a bit of writer's block, which hopefully after yesterday evening, I think I might have just found a breakthrough. But I've been working on this script that was inspired by my good friend DC Perspective. And he is going to be... his Substack piece called The Abolition of Adulthood got me really excited to talk about sort of modernity and this perpetual infantilization. And yesterday, of all places, I was playing... I was playing Metro Exodus, and I got to the end. And I'm not going to spoil anything, but it was very hand-holdy and very frustrating to deal with because it's like there's no player agency. And I was like, well, that feels rather fitting for what's going on and what I'm talking about. So I might reference that in there. But anyways, I think I've gotten past the writer's block, so scripted content should hopefully be coming out soon. But with that being said, hello, everybody. I can see that a lot of y'all are coming in. JC Denton, don't worry. He will get a second chance, but this was the first time that he came on. I did link his channel in that video description, so don't worry. He'll be back. We'll have more conversations with him in the future. So don't you worry. Adonis Shot says, Brazilian here, really enjoy your streams about geopolitics, trying to get a master's in international relations now. Well, I wish you the best of luck. I know that getting a master's degree is a lot easier than getting a bachelor's because you kind of get to research and talk about what you want to talk about, which is always nice. But I wish you the best, and I'm glad that you enjoy the streams. That's what they're here for. They're meant to be educational. They're meant to be entertaining, and I hope that we all can enjoy them as much as I enjoy putting them together for you all. So with that being said, hello Tuesday. I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad to see so many regulars pop in. It's very nice. It's nice to build a community. Like I said, I'm not used to this whole setting things up, talking to people. Like a couple of weeks ago, I had someone who subscribed to me send me like an email through like my YouTube email account that you can access on the channel. And it was just this long, like, question. Here's some articles about like critical race theory being taught in schools. And I'm still not used to that sort of like parasocial relationship. But I definitely am beginning to just enjoy putting this stuff out here for you. I do this because I like doing it. So it's all a lot of fun. There's a guy named Bullfrog in the chat. Even better. This place has become beyond frog-pilled. Is this the discount Charlemagne stream? Ouch. I haven't leveled up yet. Cut me some slack. I'm working on it. I promise to become more based in the future, but we're getting there. But with that being said, I am going to share screen, and we are going to get started on today's presentation. So with that being said, let's get started. Oops, wrong. There we go. Wrong. Not what I wanted. There we go. Present, please. Thank you. Alrighty. So with that being said, like I said last week, I wanted to do a two-parter on this issue because I thought that there was just so many moving parts and so many other factors, players, international interests in the region besides just the Americans withdrawing and the Chinese being invested in Afghanistan for its Belt and Road Initiative, that I thought that it sort of behooved me to create sort of a second stream to discuss more of the moving parts that are happening inside the American withdrawal in Afghanistan, which of course hasn't entirely finished. And there's now been recent announcements that the Americans will be withdrawing from Iraq as well, that there will be in a phased withdrawal, unlike what's happening in Afghanistan, which is more of a rapid withdrawal, completely no communication, leaving millions, if not billions of dollars in assets behind to just be either taken by the Taliban or by the Afghan National Army. So with that being said, I'm going to get started now because there's a lot of things that I think that we need to cover and go in depth about so we can have at least a more holistic understanding of what's going on. So just a recap from last week's episode, the link is in the description if you haven't seen it. So the American withdrawal has been expedient, millions of dollars of equipment left behind. There's been little to no communication from the White House with the existing Afghan government to a point where Ashraf Ghani had said that the Americans left without honesty nor honor and they're not welcome back. The Taliban for the last several months coming with this announcement from the Biden administration that they plan to be fully withdrawn by September 11th of this year. They have gained several amounts of territory and are engaging with the national government and the Afghan National Army, which of course they're doing significantly well. I mean, the Afghan National Army is more focused around the cities, trying to defend places like Kabul and other major aspects of infrastructure, while the Taliban has been seizing the more mountainous and rural regions as well, which we'll get into later because that has significant consequences and implications for things like drugs. China has received statements of welcome and cooperation from the Taliban, in part because the Taliban has been engaging in sort of this interregional diplomatic travel and talks with various parties and nations. And of course, Afghanistan's vast mineral and natural resources are being eyed by the Chinese and other interested parties. And Russia has deployed forces in response to the Tajikistan border crisis with Afghanistan. Tajikistan is a member of the CTSO, which is a regional security alliance similar to NATO. But Afghanistan's border with Tajikistan has been more or less controlled by the Taliban, which of course this is already compounded with issues of a migrant crisis, which we'll dive into more in depth later today. So here we go. So first, I think it's important to start with the interested parties, organizations, and everyone involved in the area. So the United States, of course, is that we're en route to fulfill the September 11th withdrawal agreement. However, there's still vested interest in the area, particularly amongst counterterrorism efforts and dealing with sort of this containment strategy that it has been pursuing for the last 30 or so years in regards to Iran. You have the Russian Federation, which, of course, between the CTSO, which is its security alliance, and the Eurasian Economic Union, Russia has strong economic and security concerns in the region as well, and has bolstered strong cooperation with the Chinese. The People's Republic of China, you've seen an increased diplomatic and capital investment in the region over the last decade. More or less, Pakistan, which is Afghanistan's easterly neighbor, is essentially in China's pocket in terms of both infrastructure and capital investment in the country. Turkey, of course, is a major player, in part because it's a U.S. ally, or at least nominally, as well as being a NATO partner. However, it's teetered to a closer relationship by buying Russian military technology as well. But it's more concerned about the migrant crisis because there's been an uptick in migrants from Afghanistan going through Iran to Turkey. So it has a lot of interest in trying to secure the region as well as to secure its own borders, while at the same time playing the West against the East, so to speak, in terms of where it wants to be in its own parties in the region. Then you have the CTSO, which is a Eurasian security alliance primarily led by Russia, including most of its former Soviet republics, which, of course, terrorism is going to be a primary concern because Russia's more focused dealing with the West than it is in its own region, especially with the Eurasian states and Afghanistan, which, of course, is now reorienting their geopolitical focus, considering that their main area and within this region has been security, whereas the Chinese are more so towards development. Then you have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is the multilateral economic organization consisting of Russia, India, China, Pakistan, and others. They're interested in developing a counterblock to the West and the European Union in terms of trade in the region, and trying to secure itself to be the ones involved more in Eurasian and Middle Eastern affairs, specifically for economic development. This is, of course, primarily led by the Chinese. And this is going to allow them to invest heavily in, say, resource extraction, as well as other infrastructure like telecommunications and transportation. And then, of course, finally, like we talked about last week, the Taliban, who are far more different than their 2001 selves. They've been engaging, like I said earlier, in interregional diplomatic communications, but they do wish to seek and establish an Islamic emirate in the nation of Afghanistan. They've been very adamant that they will eventually take control of the country. Whereas other parties like the Chinese and the Russians are trying to come up with a facilitated ceasefire and cooperation agreement between the two parties, the Afghan national government and the Taliban. However, many security experts have talked about, whether it's on the diplomat, the national interests, or foreign policy. I mean, even your establishment factors who are talking about this have said that the earliest that you're probably going to get negotiations to sit down is sometime after September 11th, when the Americans are completely gone. Until then, you're only inviting more and more American, political investment and involvement in the region, which, of course, neither Russia nor China want, in part because, we have a basic power vacuum at play here. Yes, and Turkey also has ethnic interests with the Turkmens. We'll talk about that when we're referring to various other terrorist organizations. The Lizard Viking, decisively, again, this is where you're going to get the question of what determines the conditions for victory. I think there was no win condition to begin with when the Americans went in 20 years ago, and I don't think that there was ever going to be a win condition. And they tried moving the goalpost, right? Because the win condition then became about things like education, democracy, women getting involved in schools and politics. So it evolved very rapidly from this neoconservative idea of, well, let's take out the Taliban, let's take out Al-Qaeda, let's take out training camps and their resources, to now sort of this more idealistic, almost pause thing about, things like decriminalizing homosexuality, pushing forth women's education in a region that has predominantly disallowed both of those things. They plan on crowning a king. An emirate would require someone of a monarchistic leadership. So I would imagine that that's their plan. But with that being said, we can continue on now that we know some of the major parties in the region. I wanted to show you this map because I think it's important to understand that Afghanistan is a very diverse country, in part because you've got Turkmen, Tajik, Pashtun, Hazara, Uzbek, a variety of ethnic groups, although Pashtuns make up the significant majority of about 42% of the population. It certainly is telling that you can see some of the regions here. I mean, the Taliban is still primarily a Pashtun force, although they have definitely become far more diverse than their 2001 counterpart, as we talked about last week. They've increased the amount of Tajiks, Turkmen, Uzbeks, and Pashai as well within their interests in, trying to secure the country. So as we can see, the areas of contested control on the right, you have 136 provinces, and compared to the more urbanized parts in which the government control, and the Taliban are controlling a significant portion of the regions towards the southwest, along other parts in the east. However, the areas of contested control, especially amongst the, I think it's the Baksha region up towards the northeast, that borders along China and Tajikistan, has seen significant gains in Taliban control as well. So there's a lot going on here that tells us what's happening. And Robert Walsh, I would imagine it's anyone that adheres to who they want to be a king. But I mean, I don't think that it's going to happen. Is diversity actually their strength, asks Stan. Well, keep in mind that it's still like a 70-30 split. So I doubt that it's going to be necessarily their strength, but I mean, keep in mind, it's still like 70% Pashtun. Afghanistan has a royal family. The Taliban had no interest in putting them in power. No, I don't think that they will, but I'm saying that the fact that they want an emirate kind of system of government details that they will probably install someone of their own interest and fashion. But yeah, that's the current, this is from the 7th of this month. So a lot has changed in the last 2 weeks. However, I thought that this was important for us to understand. It just where a lot of the government is. We can see that a lot of the Hazara-controlled regions of Afghanistan are also under government control, which has been a target of the Taliban both in the past. Back in the late 90s, the Hazara population was a lot larger, but was subject to ethnic cleansing and ethnic attacks from the Taliban as well. And the Taliban has continued to bomb and attack Hazara-based schools, primarily women's education centers. We did talk about this a little bit last week as well. So where things stand as of now. So this is a little update from last week, as well as from what I've been recently reading and catching up on in terms of my research. The Afghan government and Taliban are fighting for control of the nation. Some analysts, see it as this idea that the ANA can hold their own, or at the very least, draw the Taliban to a standstill over the territory that they do control. But the ANA faces a significant problem with either desertion or heavy losses. A couple of weeks ago, a series of ANA commandos were pretty much wiped out by the Taliban. I think it was like 27 killed. And these were their more specially trained forces. So it's indicative of the fact that they're also dealing with a significant disadvantage of, an insurgency that's been fighting a war now for, if we want to include the Soviets, 40 years, compared to, and has now faced two modern militaries and kind of knows how to deal with it. So an American trained force fighting against those who've been fighting the Americans for 20 years, you're going to see a significant problem. And not to mention the fact that many see the fact that the situation is hopeless. And we'll touch base on that when we get to the migrant crisis. But there are problems with desertion. Both Russia and China have had visits from their Taliban spokesperson, both on their immediate and long-term plans. These are just separate visits to both Russia and China, but they've also had visits with both of them present together, along with Iran and Pakistan. So the fact that the Taliban are focusing more on diplomacy is indicative of the fact that they are already trying to plan, at least to get the idea in the heads of other regional governments that they should be recognized come the time that they're putting their forces into play and have control of the nation. Both civilians and troops are fleeing Afghanistan in the wake of American withdrawal. They're either moving into Tajikistan or they're trying to get to Turkey through Iran, which is causing a variety of both diplomatic and political problems inside Iran as well as Turkey, because there have been articles that have come out talking about Iranians actually embracing some of these Afghans that are coming in, despite the fact that they already hold about 3.5 million Afghans inside of their border, which makes up roughly 4 to 5% of their population. So there's concerns about that because apparently Iran is going through a demographic issue. So you're kind of seeing the same argumentation for pro-immigration that you see here in the West coming out of Iran, which is very interesting. American officials are considering parts of Central Asia for military bases. So if you thought that we were really going to leave the Middle East, think again. There have been leaks out of the U.S. State Department that have talked about, engaging in a diplomatic dialogue for basing rights, either in places like Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, or Tajikistan. And we'll dive into that in depth later in today's presentation, but consider the fact that the United States will not be leaving the region anytime soon. And why would they? They have tentative peace agreements from the previous administration in regards to Israel. Israel, of course, is still going to want them there. Egypt is still going to want them there. The Saudis are still going to want them there. And most importantly, the United States is still pursuing a policy of containment against the Islamic Republic of Iran. So, for those that got really excited about Americans leaving Afghanistan and Iraq, I hate to burst your bubble, but we're not leaving anytime soon. And because of this, of course, the other issue that we're dealing with now is that drugs, particularly the opium heroin trade, has now been in the international spotlight once again. It's received attention from the Chinese, the Russians, and the United Nations and their counter narcotics efforts. And COVID hasn't made anything easier either. However, the only real interesting development that I've noticed in the last 2 weeks or so has been that there was a bombing attack of a bunch of Chinese engineers in Pakistan that leaves both the Chinese and Pakistan government pointing the fingers. Pakistan, blames the Taliban, or at least blames terror groups. The Taliban denies responsibility. They think that it's a freak accident, is the official statement from the Pakistan government. However, the Chinese are firmly believing in their intelligence that some sort of terror group had to do with it. They're not sure if it was the Taliban, and they're not sure if it was some other terrorist organization that we've seen along the Afghan-Chinese border, because there are plenty of terror groups in that region, and we'll talk about some of them later today. And of course, the migrant crisis that's beginning to form, and Iran is seeking to expand its role in the region, particularly as the Americans are, at least for now, leaving. I'm sure they'll be back. But Iran has bolstered itself to be more involved with Russia and China in facilitating some sort of ceasefire agreement between the Afghan national government and the Taliban. So there's a lot going on there. So So yeah, there's a lot happening, and as always, of course, this is Afghanistan. This is the graveyard of empires. So I mean, we'll see this time how other, I guess you could call it an imperial force, maybe like the Chinese or the Russians, if they decide to get more involved as it is as the Americans withdraw and what I can only consider to be defeat. So let's start off with Russia and China cooperation, because they are the two largest players that are kind of getting involved now that the Americans are leaving, at least politically and strategically. So as where things currently stand, right, with the Sino-Russian relationship, since the, it's been, 20 years now? I think this month marks the 20th anniversary of sort of their peace and cooperation agreement. So, I mean, on paper, things have been never better. They have trade agreements in terms of natural resources from the Russians to the Chinese. The Chinese sort of do most of the heavy lifting when it comes towards investment, whereas the Russians focus more so on security. They have this agreement. However, there are some of these rivaling national interests, right? So like China benefits from globalization. We know this through international trade. We know this through international investment, foreign direct investment, that the Chinese benefit from more of a stable global economy, that they can work, their angle, and with both, things like cheap labor and the fact that manufacturing can be done in China's base. They benefit more so through infrastructure investment and economic trade. So they prefer a more stable global economy. Russia, at least since 2008 with the invasion of Georgia, has benefited more so from challenging the West and, of course, its resource diplomacy. Russia's greatest, political asset right now has always been its natural resources. Everyone from George Friedman to Mearsheimer has talked about this. And even I've talked about it at length when it comes to this channel. And more recently, they plan to have the Nord Stream 2 pipeline finish later this year. So there's a lot going on for Russia to benefit, challenging sort of the American authority in the area, which, of course, is not necessarily good for the Chinese, because this means more economic disruptions, which can cause concerns for their own international interests. So things look great on paper, but there are always going to be competing interests bubbling underneath the surface. So Russia, Pakistan, China, and Iran, they're committed to facilitating. They don't want to mediate. They want to facilitate an Afghan peace process. They want to focus on leadership and cooperation. They do not want American involvement. The Russians and the Chinese are seeing this opportunity with a power vacuum to establish themselves as the primary power players inside the Middle East. The Americans have had their turns. The West has had their turn for the last 20 years. It is clear that the ability to facilitate democracy, nation building, and establishing, an infrastructure and a military that can actually fight off an effective counterinsurgent operation has failed. The Russians, of course, have their own experiences dealing with counterinsurgency. So do the Chinese. Both ironically, or both coincidentally enough, with Islamic elements as well. But they're focusing more so on a political solution rather than, say, a military one, which is definitely indicative of the changing attitudes that we're seeing in the area as well. But the concerns, of having a stronger power on your border is always going to be worrisome, especially for the Russians, right? Because the Russians, I think, recognize where they stand. You have a declining and aging population. Your military forces are primarily built up along the West, dealing with the Europeans and NATO and the growing American presence, because, nations like Poland and others are asking for a more American military presence to counter the Russians, the Ukrainians as well. So now you have, secondly, essentially the world's second largest economy, the world's second largest military, or the first, if you want to argue that, right along your sort of buffer zone, along sort of the South. Which is a concern for any national, interest in basic international relations. You don't want to have an incredibly stronger force that close to you geographically. So China's growing strength and influence are going to possibly strain the Sino-Russian relationship. So, for instance, nations like Kyrgyzstan, they have a high debt to GDP ratio to the Chinese. But of course, Kyrgyzstan in the past has been very close to the Russians and is an observer state member, I believe, of the CTSO. I think they're an observer state, but their close relationship with Russia is definitely going to be strained as the Chinese continue to pursue higher ground of economic leverage in the region. But the Russians and the Chinese call this agreement sort of the condominium agreement. It still stands. China provides development to the region. Russia utilizes the CTSO to provide security, intelligence, and counterterrorism efforts. So this may be the pathway to strengthening rather than weakening ties, given recent events in Pakistan with the bombing of that killed several engineers of Chinese nationals. This may be a way for Russia to, prove itself as a valuable asset and ally to the Chinese, or at least provide intelligence in a way to do so. But this doesn't mean that China won't act to secure its own borders, especially when it comes to Afghanistan, and won't act on its own, interests militarily, whether that's border security agreements, counterinsurgency, or counterintelligence efforts. So there's a lot going on between these two parties as well. And I think that that's important to understand, just the simple fact that these two rivaling interests, which of course are rivals to the West and rivals to the United States, have this very tenuous and I would argue it's a strained relationship, because at the end of the day, great power politics, I think, dominates most security agreements overall, because you're always going to have a national interest that is never 100% aligned with another, party that you're involved with, whether that's trade agreements, whether that's security agreements, or sharing of intelligence. So I think that is indicative, I think, of what's going to happen. Cyber Ninja Zero says the Saudis and Gulf Arabs still have an above 2.0 fertility rate. I think that'll definitely play a major factor, I think, when you start looking at other countries involved, especially when it comes to, say, Iran. So that may play a factor in the long run, and we may have to look at that in the future. But going on. So we also have the issues of drugs, terrorism, and migration, so taking a look at what's happening. So since the announcement of the American withdrawal for the last several months, there has been an uptick in the opium and heroin trade. Numerous arrests have been made in China, Iran, and Pakistan. However, many would be telling you that there is an interest, at least, in maintaining a trade route, at least illicitly, right, with Iran, because Iran has always been the stepping stone for Afghan opium and heroin to get out towards the West. So there's a lot taking place here. At least there's been a recorded uptick in the opium heroin trade. In fact, a lot of people, both from the United Nations, the United States, as well as Russia and China, have indicated, because of the rising unemployment rate in Afghanistan, which is like 11.6, and I think it's still climbing, you are seeing the drug trade look more and more appealing to the average out-of-work Afghan who may own a farm or some small patch of land, especially in this post-COVID world where everyone is still dealing with the aftershocks of people locking down and everyone's economy basically crashing over the last year and a half. But as we were talking about earlier, there are parts where China is definitely going to get more involved militarily, at least when it comes to dealing with counterterrorism efforts. So the Badakhshan province of Afghanistan, this is the part, actually I'm going to go back on the map. So if you can see my cursor, this part right here that I'm circling around, this borders China. And there are a lot of various Islamic militant groups in that region that aren't necessarily the Taliban, but are definitely sort of a thorn in the side for both the Taliban, the Afghan national government, and the Chinese government. So yeah, this area right here that my cursor is circling, if you can't see it, it's this tiny little peninsula-looking thing right here. That's the Badakhshan province. But it's been proving to be a nesting ground for various transnational terror groups, but also various terror groups of various ethnicities. So this includes some such as the East Turkmenistan Islamic Movement, the Islamic Jihad Union, and the Turkestan Islamic Party. And that's just to name a few. There has been reports from both the Afghan government that it's not as much as a threat, but the Americans did airstrike this region extensively in 2018 to take out some of these groups, including the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, the ETIM, and there's still a variety of groups there that are organizing, training, and trying to recruit people from various parts of Afghanistan, as well as some, Uyghurs as well from the Xinjiang region into this part of the provinces, which of course the Chinese have, called them out for and have considered, doing more military action and training drills towards Xinjiang. But however, they have also coincidentally have accused Western interests of funding and arming these groups in response to their crackdown on what's happening in the Xinjiang region with the Uyghur Muslims in that area. So there's a lot at play here, and there's a lot that we may not necessarily know or have access to that information as it may be classified. But I think it does lend some credence to the fact that the United States will be pursuing a Syria-style strategy in Afghanistan, at least in the Eurasian region, in the next 5 to 10 years, in part to disrupt Chinese interests in the area. But on top of drugs and terrorism, the biggest issue that we're also seeing right now, both from a U.S. perspective, a UN perspective, and a whole regional perspective, is a migrant crisis. We're seeing essentially an Afghan migrant crisis happen right before our very eyes, as a lot of people are fleeing Afghanistan either into Iran, Pakistan, or Tajikistan, as they try and leave in droves into neighboring states. The United Nations, as well as Foreign Policy magazine, have predicted that this will be an imminent humanitarian crisis. The Foreign Policy magazine article that talks about this actually blames the Biden administration for withdrawing so quickly, which it doesn't surprise me. Foreign Policy magazine is very kind of pro-foreign policy establishment, at least in the West. But since the American withdrawal, the Taliban resurgence has led to both Afghan National Army-like troops, as well as mainly women and young men, to leave the areas they think that they may be out of a job, or at least would have to deal with Taliban rule again. Turkey has also seen an increase of arrests along the Turkish-Iranian border, mostly of Afghan migrants. They have been making more and more arrests these days as Afghans try to sneak through Iran to get into Turkey. However, these arrests, I think, really compound sort of what we talked about on this channel a few weeks ago about Turkey's sort of ultimate trump card when it comes to dealing with the West, which of course is the migrant issue. And they've already got 4 million from the Syrian conflict. I don't think that they can take any more, which of course is why they're doing arrests and deportations. But the demographics of the migrants may vary. They're usually ANA personnel or women. The press continues to put their attention on the narrative of women leaving, especially because one of the main reasons of complaints that you'll hear from a lot of American and Western pundits is that the United States is abandoning its, obligation, so to speak, on gender equality in Afghanistan. So there's a lot of attention on women leaving, but it's mainly men as well as former Afghan National Army soldiers that are just leaving because they don't either want to fight the Taliban or they're, working on trying to just go into Tajikistan and not deal with this issue. Are Afghans so unwelcome in Pakistan and India that they feel the need to go to Europe? I think it comes down to the basic, where do you have better opportunities? Do you have better opportunities in Pakistan and India, or do you feel like you're going to have better opportunities where they've already accepted migrants from the Middle East before, which would be Europe? Can Israel do something to help, asks GSP. I would argue that Israel probably doesn't want to do anything. They're not. They'll never take refugees. Come on, GSP. We know this. I know you're being facetious. But I think Israel is actually going to benefit from the fact that this migrant crisis is going to disrupt the region, in part because Iran probably is debating on whether or not to take them or keep it, or they're going to just simply sit back and enjoy the fact that every other country has now been burdened by the fact that they're now dealing with various, migrant crises. I think that is indicative that Israel's not going to do a damn thing about it. They're probably enjoying it. Dave Bergeron says it's up to all the Greeks to stop them. When they release the herd. They're doing a good job right now. They've definitely cracked down on trying to keep them out of, their islands, and at least the Greek government's doing something. But yeah, we've got terrorism, we've got drugs, and we've got migration. Those are some of the biggest things that I've noticed in what's coming on. Robert Walsh says, free Afghan GF win. Well, it depends. There you go. Only time will tell if you can get your mail order Afghan bride. Israel takes refugees, just not the Muslim ones. Of course, just like various others. Just travel to Germany and pinky promise that you're a refugee, you're set for life. Oh, yeah. Can we get Fs in the chat for Germany? Merkel made a huge mistake a few years ago. But anyways, continuing on. So we're also going to have to deal with the fact that there's Russian and American tensions as well. You have the concern of Central Asian bases. So in early May, Zalmay Khalilzad, which is the U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan, reportedly visited the various Eurasian states to scope out the possibility for deployments after the Americans leave Afghanistan. So it was out of the frying pan and into the fire, so to speak, for the United States, because there's apparently going to be no real withdrawal from the region. However, what these kind of basing rights would look like have yet to be seen. However, there have been some leaks out of the State Department that have discussed the idea of at least basing rights for airstrikes, as well as logistics for, say, consultant or intelligence operative deployment. But the three nations in question, and of course I'm probably going to mispronounce at least one of these, so do forgive my sorry American ass. You've got Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. Those have been the three countries that are looked at. And in response to this, the Russians held a CTSO meeting in Tajikistan with all parties involved, which include those two countries, both as observer and member states. So the Russians know what the Americans are after. And of course, the Russians have a military base in Tajikistan, and I believe the Chinese have some military presence within that area as well. So it shows that these three countries are most likely not going to be open to having American military basing rights there. However, in the past, these countries have had at least limited American rights in the region, whether that's refueling stations or having some aircraft take advantage of having their airfields being used, particularly Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, and at least within the last 20 years when it comes to the war in Afghanistan. But along with these ongoing talks, both from the United States, the Taliban engaging in diplomacy, both the Chinese and the Russians have welcomed Iran into having a more elevated role diplomatically to improve relations with both Russia and China, but as well as the fact that they're being more involved, the fact that they're being more incorporated in the peace process and are having diplomatic communications with other nations in the region. It will prove a challenge for the United States to get basing rights in sort of the Central Asia, Eurasian region, in part because Iran's not going to stand for it. And I mean, Iran will probably do what it has always done in the past, either fund terror groups or provide some sort of economic workaround in order to punish the United States. So this would be a very easy and quick way for, Israel to get involved as well. Israel has had a history of working sort of covertly to take out, foreign interests that they see as a threat. Remember in 2008 that the Israelis bombed Syria's nuclear enrichment facilities and flew through Turkish airspace to do so. So I would not be surprised if basing rights would be used in some form or fashion to hit Iranian targets and focus less so on international terrorism. However, I do think that because of the fact that Russia and China have elevated Iran, at least in this statesman-like orientation towards diplomacy, facilitating and mediating talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government, I think it's telling the fact that Russia nor China will probably be very open to the Americans being there again, especially in a country, say, like Tajikistan, where there's already existing Russian military infrastructure as well. I would not see a very high likelihood of them embracing that. However, this may mean that the United States pursues an alternative strategy instead of an on-the-ground presence, most likely to replicate its current strategy in Syria. And considering the length of the Syrian civil war and its conflict, basing rights, I think, will be a Sisyphean task, meaning it's almost impossible. So why not just do what you have done, which is, provide lethal weapons, money, and arms and training to various radical Islamic terror groups in the area, to a point where you've now had various DoD and CIA-funded terror groups fight one another inside Syria. So I would expect a very similar repeat of the process if they can't get basing rights. I do not think that they will happen, but I think it is very telling that the United States still is interested in the region and doesn't necessarily want to pull out. Oh, I see all the F's in the chat. Thank you all. Let's see here. Shrouded Hill says, apparently China bought South Africa's only remaining nuclear power plant, and then they took it apart and shipped it to Iran. The West outsmarted yet again. I am not surprised. I would have to look into that, Shrouded Hills. But yeah, I'm not surprised that something like that was done in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, that would be definitely a good way to get the necessary technology and fissile material out of a nuclear power plant and ship it to Iran. And keep in mind, since the United States pulled out of the Iran nuclear agreement, they've pretty much torn it up as well, despite the P5+1 parties of Europe have pretty much tried their best to try and keep it alive. And the Biden administration wants to keep it alive, but I don't think that it's going to happen anytime soon. Ouchie says, new Rambo movie dedicated to the gallant people of Afghanistan win. I don't know. Didn't they do the last Rambo movie? It was called like Rambo Last Blood. And like it was him killing a bunch of Mexican cartel members underneath like his basement or something. I haven't watched any recent Rambo movies. I watched like the first one and that's about it. Massive protests going on in Kyrgyzstan from what I hear. if you've got a link to that Farbot, I would appreciate it, or at least tell me where to look that up. But yeah, I mean, the Americans want basic rights, essentially. I do not think that they're going to get them. I think that they will continue to pursue an alternate strategy. And that alternate strategy, of course, is going to be what they have been doing, which is funding, training, and operating terror groups in the region to disrupt Russian and Chinese interests, especially in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. Guided most likely by Israeli and Saudi intelligence, or at least with Israeli and Saudi funds as well. So with that being said, I do want to do some forecasting and then sort of provide some conclusions as to what's going on. I'm ignoring my Twitter feed right now because I quote tweeted some normie con, and I'm sure I'm getting blasted for it. But anyways, forecasts and conclusions. The U.S. is going to continue to pursue basing rights strategy in the region in order to maintain its current goals in the area. Our current goals, of course, are to support the regional allies like the Saudis and the Israelis, and of course maintain course on their Iranian containment policy. As at least for right now, as I would argue probably as insurance, because the Biden administration, for all of its incompetency, including what it wants to do in Iran, is to re-engage with the P5+1 agreement, the JCPOA, which is the Iran nuclear deal. They want to sort of get themselves back to it. But that's not going to happen because, as the Trump administration and now Biden has proven, that an American promise on a treaty, or at least an agreement, isn't worth anything if the next administration can tear it up just like that. And I think that that's fine, especially if, international foreign policy has differing interests from party to party. But I don't see them managing to do it. So they're pursuing this more aggressive approach of containment. And of course, still having an interest in the region. China-Russia relations, I think, will still remain relatively positive. But I do think Russia will seek to further entrench itself as to not be cut out of any potential economic benefits. I would suspect that the Belt and Road Initiative efforts, as they get underway, Russia will feel more cut off. Keep in mind that there is roughly $1 trillion worth of rare earth minerals and various other, natural resources inside Afghanistan. China already has about a decade's worth of experience of resource extraction in developing countries. Just take a look at what they've done in Africa. I think that they'll replicate the similar strategy here in Afghanistan as well. And given that Russia has been a primary, exporter of natural gas and oil to the Chinese, considering that China doesn't have much of that on their own, that they will try to do what they can to entrench themselves to be seen as an economic and strategic necessity in the area, whether that's through the CTSO or through their own intelligence and through their own military apparatus. That remains to be seen. However, I do think that the CTSO is going to see more geopolitical importance in the coming years, especially as Russia tries to be more and more, cautious and concerned about this rising national hegemon, international hegemon, global leadership, the Chinese, being essentially right on their border, the same way that the West is on Russia's border through its buffer states. There will be more international attention placed on the Afghan diaspora as this becomes a full-blown migrant crisis, because I would suspect that when and if and when, I think it's more of a when question, when the Taliban eventually take over the Afghan national government and get to establish what they want to establish and resume their leadership role as they were about 25 years ago, you are going to see a massive migrant crisis outside of Afghanistan, either from westernized Afghans, Western educated Afghans, those who have attended women's schools. You will see a migrant crisis. I think it will be primarily through Iran to get to Turkey into the West. And the European Union will most likely get involved because they already want to negate Turkish influence on the migrant question as it is. Because as we've talked about on our stream between Turkish-EU relations, which you can find on this channel, so if you're not subscribed, you should already go and do that and look it up, that Turkey's got the trump card more or less on any sort of European Union delegation that comes over to talk about human rights or admitting them into the EU, because Turkey's got 4.2 million reasons why they should be, in control of the conversation when Erdogan has threatened in the past to open the floodgates and just let the migrants into Europe. So I would expect that a lot more international attention will be focused on this Afghan diaspora, which I think is to come. The real question will become, do they just stay in Iran because Iran wants to keep them for either a labor force or just to simply have an increased, population that's of working age. Aside from that, of course, the Taliban are going to continue to seek control of the Afghan government, despite efforts from regional players to facilitate peace. As we said earlier, the earliest time that anyone's going to have actual, on the ground talks between the Afghan national government and all these parties involved with the Taliban is going to be October 2021 when the Americans are finally gone. I think that's the most important part there, because within that time frame, what's going to happen is that the Afghans are going to try and pursue, or the Taliban, excuse me, are going to try and pursue to gain as much territorial and infrastructure control over the country as humanly possible. So when it comes time to negotiate or facilitate a ceasefire agreement between the two parties, their position is going to be the unconditional surrender of the Afghan national government. They do not want Ashraf Ghani in power. They do not want anything really by the Americans to stay around. Of course, they still want to install some sort of Islamic emirate into the country. So, I mean, the fighting is only going to intensify between the Afghan National Army and the Taliban from now until October. And I do suspect, given the fact that the Taliban managed to hold off against the Americans for 20 years, that the Afghan national government and its military forces are not going to succeed, especially when you're dealing with widespread desertion, or the fact that when it comes to these engagements, the Taliban win most of the time. So you're going to just see pockets of resistance, primarily in the cities, as every other facet of the nation is controlled by the Taliban and various other ethnic and Islamic groups in the country. So overall, despite the American withdrawal and our leaving, Afghanistan and Iraq, the nation of Afghanistan is nowhere near out of the international spotlight. Whether that's concerns over terror, drugs, migrants, and trade investment to come, all of these are going to play a major role. I do suspect that the Taliban will eventually manage to have control over the Afghan government, and an extension will be the de facto leadership in that area. They have been setting out that message now since the American announcement with the peace agreement back in last February of last year. So I think that there's a lot going on that is indicative that Afghanistan's not going to be out of the news anytime soon. It may be out of Western media news, but if we take a look at, say, Press TV, the Russians or the Chinese, especially from their foreign ministries, and what they put out as announcements, Afghanistan's not leaving the international spotlight anytime soon. Despite whatever we may hear from this administration about, a mission accomplished, or we, fulfilled our agreement, we left, we did what we can to establish democracy and education in Afghanistan. The fact that this, withdrawal is a decisive defeat for the American military establishment, it's important to recognize that this also has broader implications geopolitically for the United States. I mean, what has Russia and China been doing for the last 20 years while we've been fighting in the desert? They've been watching, and they know more or less to an extent of, how we operate, how we deploy, what our rules of engagement are, and how we deal with insurgency. And by extension, how do we operate and train another military force, and how do we negotiate with them, and how do our coalition partners and NATO allies do it? So there has now been 20 years of American rivals having an observation of how the American military operates, and by extension, how NATO and our coalition partners would operate, which is a great intelligence advantage if you kind of know doctrine and if you know strategy of your opponent, you know how they operate. So for any future engagement, whether the Chinese and the United States square off in the South China Sea, or it's the Middle East, or it's in Africa, I think that you are now going to see a significant advantage tilt towards the rivals of the United States because they have the intelligence advantage to know just exactly how the United States operates. And to me, that is really indicative of, pending geopolitical troubles to come, not just in this region, but globally. So there's a lot going on there. But as for other forecasts to make, I do think that the Belt and Road Initiative will continue. I think that it will put a strain on the Russian-Chinese relationship. Whether or not Russia reorients itself away from the West to deal more with the Middle East becomes the real significant question. But I think that if we take a look at that question, right, whether or not China moves to the South instead of the West, I think that they will move to the South, in part because you've got European leadership becoming less and less dependent upon the United States. You've got the upcoming German elections in September, where at least the CDU, which is one of the parties that may win the chancellorship, has advocated for a stronger diplomatic and strategic relationship with Russia over the United States. So despite calls from countries, say, like Poland or Ukraine, I think that if you don't have Western Europe's backing, then I think Russia will have a much easier time negotiating a political position in the West and may not need so much of its strategic resources placed there. And maybe in Ukraine, of course, but that would be about it. Because then having access to vast resources, maintaining security with the Chinese in that region, in the Middle East and Eurasia, would benefit them politically as they side with the growing hegemonic power that we're seeing across the globe, which of course is the Chinese. Add on the growing international dependence of trade from various, countries and continents and trade organizations towards the Chinese. The Chinese get what they want by achieving stability through global finance, and thus, by extension, can rely on the Russians for security as they maintain the wealth and can build up their own to challenge the U.S. eventually. So there's a lot that can be taken from this, and I think Afghanistan is going to be sort of this epicenter that will ripple out through various other areas throughout the country. All right, let's take a look at what chat's been saying, because I just went on this very long rant of predictions. Let's see here. We did what we could. It's not a victory speech. Yeah, it's not a victory speech. This is a major loss for the United States. It's pretty bad. Like, this is not good. Let's see here. All those westernized Afghans will vote into socialists that can or won't understand how the Fed works. Let the Taliban reculture them. I mean, again, it depends on where they go. But yeah, there's a lot happening. The Shrouded Hill says the CDU is running a literal garden gnome. Lachette. I now have to look this guy up because he's a... Let's see. Armin Lachette. I need a picture of him. Is he an actual garden gnome? What does he look like? You say he's a garden gnome just because he's like short, or because of... Well, let's see here. Can I find a picture of him that's not in a mask? That would be nice. Let's find images. Oh, never mind. I got one. He kind of does look like a garden gnome. It's at Prudentialist. It's good for dissidents. Did I miss something here where it's good for dissidents? I have not been paying too much attention to the chat. I usually do that towards the end. Oh, and also because he has the charisma of a sack of potatoes. Maybe that's just most Germans that I've met in my lifetime that have the charisma of a sack of potatoes. Maybe that's just my bias of growing up as a kid overseas in Germany. I don't know. The president of Ireland is Danny DeVito in disguise. Yes, but he has a very cute dog, so we can all excuse it. But yeah, those are that's pretty much the addendum to last week's sort of presentation I had on Afghanistan. I thought that it would be important to focus on the Russian-China relationship, the Americans wanting to leave but not leave the area, and then, of course, terrorism, trade, and migration, these huge factors that are playing a role, not to mention the opium and heroin trade, which is still a massive problem that goes through Iran and then through Turkey and then it hits the rest of the West. But those are some of the forecasts. This is my analysis. This is what I find. I researched the topic throughout the week, and then on Saturday, Sunday, right before the show, I just binged the latest articles, so I'm as much up to date as I can on everything going on. And then, of course, I can't wait for the comments where someone who's like locally from the region can tell me what I got wrong. But I'm always here to learn. That's what I'm here to do. Eventually, I want to make this something where, like, this is where people go to get really good analysis and forecasting. So, baby steps. But we are now near the end of the lecture, which I think you all know what that means, and what comes next. And that, of course, is the Frog of the Week. Elevation X asks, seriously, what was the last war the U.S. actually won on their own? Spanish-American War, if you want to say what they won on their own. But yes, Forged in the Ashes, it is Frog of the Week time. So, bam, there it is, the Frog of the Week, TFW. And this time it is the Motorbike Frog, indigenous to the wonderful continent and nation of Australia. Vittoria Morai, named after John Moore, who was a herpetologist and a frog expert in the 1950s in Australia, and he is primarily responsible for a lot of the research into frogs and lizards and other reptiles and amphibians in Australia. So he is well known within that community, and so they named this frog after him. But he is the Motorbike Frog. He's native to Southwest Australia. He's a terrestrial ground-dwelling frog. Their skin color varies depending on how much sun exposure they have. The modeling that we can see on the bottom of the green and gold means that this frog has been exposed to the sun a lot, whereas the one on top, not so much. He's very darker and brown and sort of a dark green as well, so he hasn't been seeing so much sunlight. They're often confused or labeled as tree frogs, despite the fact that they are burrowing, ground-dwelling terrestrial creatures. They eat a variety of insects, worms, and sometimes flies and others that are, creatures smaller than them. However, they are primarily dealing with insects and those underground because they are relatively small, only 2 to 3 inches in length. However, when it comes to mating, the males will usually stand atop various foliage and fauna and have their calls in long bursts of about 20 to 40 seconds in order to attract a mate. But these guys, I think, are pretty damn adorable, especially that top one. He's got these cute little eyes. But that's the Frog of the Week. Frog of the Week starts viewer count over 9,000. I would love that. That would be nice. That would be great. But yeah, this is does it sound like a bike? Actually, I don't know. We can probably find a, let's just take a look up of its mating call. Motorbike Frog mating call. See, this is what Google is for. And then I can put the link in the chat. Oh yeah, it sounds like a motorbike. We're gonna go share this now with all of you in the chat so everyone can enjoy it. So here we go. Bam. I put it in the chat for you all to listen to. I really don't know how the audio yet works for StreamYards and making the sound work. I wonder. Hold on. Never mind. But yeah, that's what we have here. So yeah, that's the Frog of the Week. And as always, I enjoy sharing this all with you. And that's actually going to be a piece of merch in the future when I'm done. He's even shifting at the end. Yeah, I know. It's pretty damn cute. Well, let me try and play it then. Hold on. Let me go see if I can play it on stream. I don't know necessarily how that works. But we'll stop sharing this one. So remove. Stop screen. Share screen. Next time you're on Unpopular Opinions, make it my intro music. That'd be funny as hell. So let's share it. And let's see here. Theater mode. And then let me see if I can make the audio play. That would be the real question here. I actually don't know how that works. Let's go turn up the volume and let's see if I can play it. But yeah, it definitely sounds like a motorbike for sure. I am definitely going to have to learn how to get the audio to work on these things. But yeah, that's the Frog of the Week. And next time I'm on Unpopular Opinions, make it my intro music. I'll talk to AA and John D about that. I don't think they would like it. But hold on a second. Maybe I can. Let's see here. General. Let's see here. Audio. I wonder if I can get that to work here. I got that Tech 9 for technical difficulties. Isn't it weird that I imagine Prudentialist looking exactly like Edmund Burke? I look nothing like Edmund Burke either, which is the funny thing. The only person who has ever seen my face and knows what I look like is Dan Normie, and he can tell you right now that I look nothing like Edmund Burke. Simple as that. But yeah, that's what we have for this week, ladies and gents. I'm still going to figure out how to put the audio and make that work. But until then, I have the chat, or the chat has the link as well. But with that being said, let me go to. I know that a couple of y'all sent some supers in, so let me go take a look at those, and then we can just chill out and hang out with everybody. So let's get started. Yep, Dan confirmed it for us. All right, Bolero 393 sends $9.99 US. Thank you so much. If the Europeans send a woman to negotiate with Turkey, she won't get a seat at the table. They'll make her sit in the couch in the other room. LOL. Just like what happened last time. Ursula was complaining it was because she's a woman, which I mean is probably true. Let's face it. But I mean, it's not like it's common sense. Why on earth am I going to send a neoliberal internationalist woman with no head covering into an Islamic country to negotiate about things like human rights, democracy, and the treatment of migrants when Turkey doesn't care. That was the funniest thing ever, and we covered that a couple of weeks ago on Unpopular Opinions. That was just a really, really fun time. I think you sent it twice, Bolero, because I'm seeing it on my studio that you sent it twice. Oh no, you continued even more. If EU sends a woman to Turkey to negotiate, she won't get a seat at the table. They'll give her a seat in the couch in the other room and put 3 migrant stowaways in her luggage. Oh, Bolero, you crack me up. And then Robert Walsh sends $5 Canadian. The Frog of the Week starts and the viewer count goes over 9,000. That is great. But yeah, no, it's enjoyable because Sip silence thought Erdogan. But yeah, Robert Walsh, I'm still currently working on my Redbubble store, and I will hopefully have that out by the end of the month. So come August, you guys can enjoy some lovely Frog nationalism shirts and some mugs and things like that. But I do have a t-shirt in mind that just says, I'm just here for Frog of the Week. I'm still working on the lettering and all that jazz. So I will have some fun Frog of the Week related stuff for you. I might put together a calendar because we've done like, what 14 now of these. So I might just take the favorites of 12 of them and make it a calendar or something, the little facts and things from the stream. But yeah, it'll be Mr. Prude's. It's going to be named after, I think, my Telegram chat, which is linked in the description. Mr. Prude's Frog Emporium, I think, is what I'm going to call the merch store. Just because it's going to be a lot of fun to have like Frogmund Burke and various other things that I would do. I do have one, though, of Edmund Burke on a mug that just says, I tried to warn you when we talk about revolution. So yeah, the frog shop is definitely coming, and it will be Mr. Prude's Frog Emporium. I cannot wait. And I'm also getting, I've been on Fiverr. I'm kind of waiting now to get back from them because I like paid like 5 different artists. Just like, hey, can you make like Edmund Burke but a frog? So I might get a new profile picture as well. Because as much as I have a deep respect for Mr. Burke, I think that Frogmund Burke would be a little more on brand. I just think that would be a lot of fun. And the extra benefit is that I'm teleworking next week. I finally started my new job in person, which was nice because I was supposed to start like a month ago, actually a little more than a month ago. But of course the transplant happened, which sort of interrupted everything. So I finally started this week, which was enjoyable. I like what I do, and things are pretty relaxed and nice there. So I'm like, oh, I could definitely get settled here, and the money's not bad either. So it's really nice. Hector says, I'm getting a PBS video about millennials hating boomers as the first recommendation under this video. You got to love that YouTube algorithm, man. You watch anyone who's remotely based or reactionary, then that's what's going to happen. I'm surprised you didn't get a Jordan Peterson video like everyone else, but I'll take PBS. That's fine. It's better than Jordan Peterson being under my recommendations feed. Paying in rupees for artwork on Fiverr based in capitalism. Pilled. Yes, Shrouded Hills, exactly right. Yiz says, can't stay busy with housework and family like usual. Wanted to pop in and drop a heart for the Prudentialist and others. Well, thank you, Yiz. I appreciate it. But yeah, I do have like 5 people I paid Shrouded Hills just to see if I can find something that's worthwhile. And hopefully I'll get a new profile picture. And if not, all that stuff is going to be used for merch anyway. Cyber Ninja Zero says apparently Sargon is the new JPB in the YouTube algorithm. Is it Sargon or is it his Lotus Eaters account? Because I kind of get these weird notifications on occasion where it tells me like his Sargon of Akkad channel is live. Like he did that stream a few weeks ago about transracialism and Destiny being a reactionary, which I thought was hilarious. But yeah, I if he's the new JPB in the YouTube algorithm, then I mean, of course, YouTube's going to do whatever you can to stay in that normie sphere of the Overton window. We gotta keep liberalism alive, people. Gotta keep liberalism going, which I always find funny. Like I got an ad on Twitter. The algorithm tips the fedora. That's very true. They got to keep us. We can't grow apparently because of that. Sargon is live now, by the way. Oh no. Well, I guess we'll watch him when we're all done. I like listening to what Sargon has to say. I think for anyone who's made an internet journey, like internet politics, you kind of like start with him, and then you find everybody else. Like through Sargon, I've heard about AA, and then I heard about Charlemagne, and then I heard about Dave the Distributist, and then Aaron McIntyre. So it's just like, thank you. The pipeline is very much real, and now I'm a reactionary, and I'm not anything at all. It's liberal or conservative. So it's always interesting. It's liberalisticism. Yeah, I don't. He calls himself what, an English liberal still, or liberalists? Is a liberalist, not a liberal. Yeah, I mean, but it's still adhering to liberalism. Shows how far things have accelerated. Indeed, you're absolutely right. And as Dan Normie says, the algorithm wants you to read your Locke. He wants you to read your John Locke, guys. That second treatise of government, that's all you need. You don't need to read anything else. You don't need to read the Machiavellians. You don't need to read the Suicide of the West. You don't need to read De Maistre or Evola. Just go read your Locke. Bolero, we can't ever go back to the 1990s. That's the big problem there. We can't go back. As much as like how AA says, the desire to go back to Fresh Prince is real, but it's not going to happen. And I might do a Monday morning musing about that one of these days, where we talk about just the simple fact that we can't go back. The fact is that we've accelerated too far. Technology has gotten to a point where a mind virus can take a hold so easily. I mean, we are basically conditioned from Hollywood to the media to the internet to Twitter and social media. And those algorithms and trends have essentially programmed a populace that if we were to even go back to the 1990s, that would be like trying to stop heroin cold turkey. To be frank, the Taliban got to go back to the 90s. Well, I mean, the Taliban was always going to, like, I mean, they're stuck in the 90s. They're fundamentalists. They can go back to the 90s because they'll brutally enforce the 1990s, and they'll brutally enforce their version of Islamic law. You can't even get a bunch of guys to protest the destruction of American monuments here in the United States without, these security apparatus coming out to get you. Hell, you can't even buy a Lego set of the U.S. Capitol without getting a call from the FBI. So, I mean, that's all I can say there. Felix Knight says Sargon was good for Gamergate. Yep, him and Short Fat Otaku were great for Gamergate. Yeah, the 690s. Yeah, yes, because 690s is right. Time Stealer is correct. He knows it now. He knows it too now. I'm not sure why he gets such a hard time in the AA chat. He's essentially on our side. I mean, I think it's because you get these cute little moments where he was on Unpopular Opinions a couple of months back, where he talked about like migrants receiving an open letter of just saying don't come here. So I mean, who knows? And as long as Toyota makes pickup trucks, global terrorism will prosper. There was a great little ad about the Toyota Hilux on Twitter where someone had pictures of like all the Toyota trucks with various mounted weaponry, whether it's anti-air cannons or rockets. And it's like, the Toyota Hilux is so good, it can hold any confiscated weaponry in the pickup truck's bed that you won't need anything. And I just thought that was hilarious. I'm going to have to find that. I'll post that on the YouTube community thing if it'll let me, because that's a hilarious little meme ad. And who says the cathedral won't try to go back to the 1990s by force? I think that they have, or at the very least, they've gone back to 2012, Raging Mandrill, with this whole, America's back, America's united, America is, this and that, and then this build back better nonsense. There's very much a post 2008 feel to it all, like Barack Obama saying like, oh, we're all going to come together, we're all going to recover from the economy. It feels very much like that. The rhetoric I get out of like Biden's speechwriters is very interesting, because to me it's very much a very much like a return to the Barack Obama, everything's going to be hippy dippy and okay, we're going to be just fine, we're going to cure all these problems, but it's like maximized because the Obama administration targeted the same people that Biden is doing now, but they did it much more subtly. And, people would fall on the sword if they got caught with like the IRS scandal or the, Health and Human Services things. So it, to me, the fact that they're just more overt and out of the closet with it, they're like, oh yeah, we're targeting people. We're telling Facebook what to do. We're going to have, misinformation and people come door to door. Like it's nothing like the 1990s. It's very much like the 2012 era of politics where there's like division, but now it's just the switch has been flipped and everything's amplified, despite the fact that they want it to be like back in time. Forged and Ashes asks, when will Prudent Reads come out? As soon as I finish reading my copy of Bertrand de Jouvenel's On Power, because it took forever. I ordered it like 2.5 weeks ago and it's been lost in the mail, and it finally showed up this week on Thursday. So that will come probably next month. But I did get my copy of BreadTube Serves Imperialism, which has been a very interesting read because it's a lefty criticizing BreadTube, like a really diehard, protested Occupy Wall Street in 2012 kind of like lefty, who's very much an anti-capitalist. I didn't know this when I bought the book at all. Like, I was like, oh, someone's shitting on Vosh and he published a book about it. Like, let's do it. So I bought it. I'm like halfway through it, and it's very interesting. So I will probably do like a mini stream talking about this, or I might do a short video review on BreadTube Serves Imperialism, because it's been a very like historically literate read. Like, this guy knows his stuff, although I vehemently disagree with him. But yeah, I'll definitely have to get on with that. Yes, this is the book that says Vosh glows in the dark, Cyber Ninja Zero. I haven't gotten to the Vosh chapter yet, but yes, this is the book that says it. So I'll probably definitely be doing a review or a stream where I just talk about and read some of the highlights. Hector Newman says, but hey, the crime rate is back to the 90s. I mean, yes, it is. It's the worst it's been in 23 years. The cathedral wants to boil the frog of the week over my cold, dead hands. They will never boil the frog of the week. They're all too precious. But yeah, I mean, that's what's been going on. And now that I think I've topped off my writer's block. So there should be a scripted video out soon on, modernity and its infantilization of the populace. Because again, it's very much like if we were to take an entire population and tell them to quit doing hard drugs cold turkey and be normal. That's very much what we've been programmed through modernity, to be very childlike and very adverse to the things that we consider adult, to a point where we now treat adulting. I hate that phrase. Like, I don't know how to be an adult. I don't know what adulting is. Like, that just tells me that we have failed in very much. We have definitely failed as a society. Lalo says, I have a very nuanced perspective on Afghanistan, which leads to my conclusion that if I were in control of the government, I would leave a battalion there. Having a small contingent is the political savvy thing to do. Are you referring to like having a small force or detachment there for the sole purpose of it being like a political tripwire? Like, if you were to attack, you invite like the greater force of the United States back in there? Because I mean, that's essentially what we do in South Korea. I'm very curious to hear your perspective here, Lalo. Now you've got everyone asking why. Okay, like a strategic tripwire. Okay, Lalo, I see where you're coming from. Shrouded Hill says, mystery, why was the suicide rate so low in 2020? The reason why is because drug ODs were up 30% in 2020. Yes, they are. The only curve that we have not flattened in the last year and a half is the opioid epidemic, and I don't think that we ever will. And the people at Sackler and Purdue should be things in Minecraft I can't talk about, but you know what I mean. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that has been the conclusion to today's lecture, including our lovely Frog of the Week. I am very thankful for all the super chats that come in. And so now it is time to do what I always do at the end of the show, which is a little bit of shilling. We're going to just do a little bit of shilling. So with that being said, let me go show you my wonderful, let's take a look here. Wrong thing there. Let's go back so I can load this up for you all. So, share screen, Chrome tab, and share. So this is, of course, if you are interested in being a supporter of the channel and the things that I do, whether that's scripted videos, rather off-the-cuff takes, being on live streams, and of course the Sunday show with geopolitical analysis, this is my Subscribe Star page. And this is where I let everyone who's a subscriber know. I've got plenty of people that have come on. We've got 23 now so far. And all the money that you guys give goes straight to me taking care of my medication. And recently, as I've said, I've talked about, the transplant video. I've talked about it in our return stream. All of the funds that you guys go for, you guys pay for my anti-rejection medication. I don't keep any of this money. It doesn't go into my bank account. It doesn't go into anything. It either goes back into the channel like the Fiverr stuff. But most importantly, it goes to help paying off just a small sliver of my medical expenses. I have a brand new lease on life. The support that I've gotten from you guys during the surgery while I was in the hospital, and even when I've come out and things have been a little slow with content, I am incredibly blessed and thankful. And so, like I say, I hope that I can give you guys the ideas, the analysis, and the tools that we need to just survive, grow, and thrive, both in our knowledge and our communities in these difficult times. And that's what I plan to do. I love doing this. this is a second job to me, but this is the one where, if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. And I don't feel like I work much for this, because I enjoy talking to you guys and, talking to all these people that I've now been exposed to, whether that's RN, whether that's AA, Charlemagne, John D, and others. I'm just incredibly thankful. And you guys help keep that going. You guys are the reason why I get to take care of myself and go to the Walgreens pharmacy at the hospital and pay for my meds with not a problem in the world. So with all that, I'm incredibly thankful. There are a variety of tiers on the Subscribe Star. They're all frog and toad themed. So if you want to check them out for yourselves, by all means, take a look and enjoy. But with that being said, guys, we're now at the hour and 15-minute mark. I'm very thankful for all the support, like people like Forged and Ashes. And, of course, if you are interested in being a supporter, some of the tiers allow you to come on to the Sunday stream. Or, we can schedule a live stream appearance to talk about very other stuff as well. Because, in part, Robert Freed is one of our supporters, and he and I will be talking about Cuba this Friday. So keep that in mind. But also this Wednesday, I'm going to have some very special guests, including Mr. Patriarch, to talk about what's going on in South Africa. So there's a lot of foreign affairs stuff that's coming up as well. And I think that's all that you need to know about what's going on. I will have a scripted stuff out this week. I've now finally overcome my writer's block like I've talked about. So that'll be a premiere. So you all will get a lot of stuff to enjoy. But until then, everybody, enjoy the Frog of the Week. Enjoy these lectures. Be sure to subscribe and share the stream. I would love it if you guys shared the stuff. The more I can get out there, the more attention I can be seen by others. All the best. And so be prudent, everybody. I love y'all, and take care.